Bethany Corbin, she gave me chills more than once. Have you ever heard of the term FemTech? Fem, F-E-M, short for feminine, FemTech. I haven't. It was coined in 2016, but it's, feminine technology. Her mission is to positively impact women's health. She had an issue where she went to get a regular checkup. Doctor said, "Are you pregnant?" She said, "No." Long story short, she had a thyroid issue the size of a basketball. And the way she was treated afterwards with the surgeries that were available, they were minimal. She's in a heavily populated area. She couldn't get anything there. So she created Femnovation. The impact of the reversal of post Roe has caused all these data issues where many women were actually canceling their applications that had tracking their menstruation, etc. And privacy has been overturned in a lot of this. And so they're scared of it, and people putting bad information in, and it's such a whirlwind. And you're going to hear Bethany speak about it. And she created Feminovation to help FemTech firms create and get resources. She's a lawyer by trade. She was up for partners. She found it not rewarding. She was a professor, law professor as well. She's completely made a pivot into FemTech and helping FemTech firms. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. I asked, what can we do? I'm selfish here. I'm a father of two daughters, and I'm concerned. I want what's best for my daughters. I want what's best for women. Great conversation with Bethany. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Oh my goodness, Bethany Corbin, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited to talk to you. So the term femtech was coined in 2016, but I've never heard of it until I started looking into what you do. What is it?
Yeah, Joe, you're not alone. A lot of people have not heard the term femtech. So as you mentioned, right, it was coined in 2016. So it's a relatively new term. And what it's talking about is female health technology. So really any type of digital health product that is geared towards assisting or improving women's healthcare. So things you've probably heard about in the spectrum are like your period tracking apps, ovulation trackers, maternal healthcare apps, wearable devices. Some of the big names are Clue, Glow, Flow, Thinks, Kindbody. Maven Clinic is the new one that's come out very recently that's making headwaves as a unicorn because it is a telehealth platform for women. So it's very broad and really intended to empower women and give them control and autonomy over their healthcare decisions.
Because our healthcare system is, you mentioned it, it's just generally male dominated, and you had, oh my goodness, Bethany, a terrible episode a couple of years ago. They asked you if you were pregnant. You ended up having, I don't want to steal your thunder, uterine thyroid size of a basketball.
Oh, Joe, it was terrible. And I'm one of those people who goes for my annual physical exam every year. And so this came as a surprise. It was during the height of COVID. I just had my annual physical coming up. And really, I almost canceled it. I thought there's
Wow.
nothing wrong with me. I'm not having a ton of symptoms because, as women, a lot of times we write off any symptoms we are having as normal. I don't know why I never hit send on the message to cancel my appointment, but
Hmm.
I'm very glad I didn't. I went there. I had talked my way out of a blood test. I was like, I don't want to know what my cholesterol is. I talked my way out of it. I thought we were done. And then at the very end, she's like, great, I just have to push on your stomach, right? Do the pelvic exam and we're done.
Sure.
So we did that, and she looks at me and she goes, are you pregnant? And I'm like, there's no way, right? There's absolutely 0% chance I am pregnant. So then she goes and she gets a measuring tape. And at that point in my head, it hasn't quite clicked for me that there's something in there until she measures across my entire abdomen. And then she comes and she says, you have a pelvic mass. And that was when it really sunk in that there's something in there. I was the equivalent of 5 to 6 months pregnant with how big my stomach had become. And there were huge uterine fibroids in there. I had emergency OBGYN appointments, emergency blood draws to make sure that this wasn't something cancerous, and ultimately ended up finding out that I had uterine fibroids. And 80% of women are going to have uterine fibroids throughout their life. It's an incredible statistic.
And without this, I don't know anything about this because I just don't. I mean, things could have gotten a lot worse. It's a good thing that you went to that appointment. So it's good and bad.
It is, and what I hadn't realized is my fibroids were so large, they were actually crushing my other organs. It was interesting because, for instance, I was having to get up to use the restroom during the night. And I just thought, that's a sign of aging. I'm drinking too
Mm,
much water at night. No, whenever you look at the MRI, it shows that my bladder was actually so compressed by this fibroid. It was so tiny. And that was really startling. And as, for somebody who doesn't know how to read medical images, right? They popped up the image and all I see is this black space. And I'm like, oh, that's just fat. And they're like, no, 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 that is the fibroid.
wow.
So it was
Wow.
definitely a really scary time and really difficult to navigate the process as a patient instead of a healthcare lawyer and healthcare advocate. It was a different perspective.
Yeah, and the way it kind of went down, you said it didn't the procedures were didn't go that smoothly, and it kind of thrust you into this because you went to law school, Bethany. You are a lawyer, as you just mentioned.
Yes. Yeah, it was very interesting because I switched, right? I had to become my own advocate now as a patient. So I dove in the same day I got the diagnosis, dove into what were the options. Because whenever my doctor said, "Oh, 80% of women will have fibroids," I thought, "Great, is there a pill? How do we handle
Right.
this? 80% of women will have this." And she laughed at me and she said, "No, the newest treatment is a uterine artery embolization, which is a minimally invasive procedure." And I thought, "Okay, let's check that out." And so as we got into the details, right, you hear minimally invasive, right? You think it's going to be something that's really okay.
Sure.
It has been likened to a heart attack for your uterus, and the pain that's associated with it, it doesn't make the fibroids fully go away. It shrinks them, and with mine being so big, shrinkage would still mean that they're pressing on organs. So that
Mm,
actually wasn't an option for me. So then we turn and we say, okay, what else is out there? Well, hysterectomy is still the only cure for fibroids. And most women, especially if they're not near menopausal age, that's what they're prescribed because it's the only cure that we have. Still being in my reproductive years, my doctor didn't want to do a hysterectomy. And so that left me with a myomectomy. And interestingly, so myomectomy is where they go in and they scoop out the fibroids, basically. They cut into your uterine wall, into the different layers, and scoop out the fibroids. And so then you have, a lot of stitches in the uterus.
mm,
Very painful procedure, one of the top 10 most painful procedures that you can have done. And because of the size of my fibroids, nobody in my local area would give me a laparoscopic option. So it was supposed to be an open abdominal surgery with, huge risks of blood loss, huge risks of infection, that type of
mm.
thing. And this is kind of where, as a healthcare attorney, you know, the one thing I'm grateful for the COVID pandemic is its proliferation of digital health.
Mm.
So really, because we had those new technologies and the telehealth solutions, I was actually able to get a consult at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota without ever leaving the comfort of my couch,
Wow.
and get a consult there to see if their team could offer a laparoscopic approach. And I actually got to talk with the woman who wrote the book on fibroids. And she wasn't a surgeon, but she was able to talk me through it, talk me through how this would impact my fertility, what we knew, what we were doing for treatments, and the possible surgical options. So that was just an incredible advancement.
And you're in the greater North Carolina area. I mean, right? You're in a very, and you couldn't get this surgery. It's astounding.
Yeah, not laparoscopically. The doctors there were not trained to take out this big of a fibroid through a laparoscopic hole. And,
Wow.
and to be fair, the Mayo Clinic doctors that I ended up going with were so skilled in this, but it even took them 7 hours during surgery to get the fibroids out. And for reference, right, a heart transplant that's non-complicated, that's about 3 to 4 hours.
Mm.
So it was still a 7-hour procedure at Mayo Clinic because of the complexity.
So this launches you into FemTech, and you founded Feminovation, and you make a career trajectory. It seems change.
I do. I had been in healthcare for many years before going into femtech. And it's interesting. I first came across femtech in 2018, so it was 2 years after it had been coined. I was working as a law professor, and I had come across this term in some completely unrelated research. And I was really excited about it. I started doing some research. I realized nobody, especially in the legal field, was really talking about it.
Hmm.
And so I actually wanted to get back into the healthcare field to work with startup companies and their devices and help bring them to market. So I actually left academia. I went back into the practice of big law. But once you get back in that practice, right, you get kind of caught up in the corporate world and the nice
Mm.
salary that you have. I kind of lost track of where I had intended to go with femtech and women's health. Then, of course, as if fate stepped in, I got my own diagnosis and I navigated that entire terrain. And I thought, if 80% of men had fibroids, right, benign tumors that are growing on their reproductive organs, there would absolutely be a pill. We would know exactly what
Mm.
causes it. We would have a cure.
Mm.
And because so much of medicine has excluded women, we have none of that. And so that really propelled me to say, I need to make a shift here. How can I contribute as an attorney to these companies to get them to market faster? And so I left, I went to a digital health innovation firm for a while, and then launched out on my own through Feminovation.
Incredible, incredible. And what I mean, so what are the all right, so let's just talk about it. Post-Roe world, right? I mean, so how has that complicated what you're doing and just the industry?
Oh, hugely complicated. So by background, right, I'm a healthcare attorney, but I also specialize in privacy, and that's part of what really got thrust to the forefront when we had the Roe decision be overturned. So whenever Dobbs came into play, we had, and I'm sure you all have seen them, right, all of these articles from the media saying, delete your period tracking apps, right? Your data is not safe. We need to
Mm.
delete these apps. And so we had tens of thousands of women deleting their femtech applications because they didn't feel that their data was safe with these femtech companies. And so that, I will say, has been a huge shift in the femtech industry because we're dealing with an industry now that has lost consumer trust in a way that other health technology companies haven't lost trust yet, even though they're not doing anything different than other health tech companies with how they're storing their data. Now
Mm.
we've seen really reproductive health data kind of taking a step up in terms of the need to protect it, recognizing its sensitivity. And so consumers are actually starting to demand more protections for their data and are being much more cognizant and careful about where they place that data out into the world. So that's been a huge shift. The other shift that we've seen are a lot of healthcare companies are coming and saying, you know what if we incidentally touch reproductive health data? So this might be things like your fertility tracking apps, right? Or healthcare providers or applications that are not directly dealing with abortions or, those types of reproductive health services, but tangentially touch them. And they say, What do we do if somebody puts in a free, free fill out form that they've had an abortion? How do we handle that data? Are we now liable if something happens to that data? Those have been some of the really interesting discussions that we're having, in addition to just the general discussions that are happening about the changing abortion laws, the abortion shield laws that have come into play to protect reproductive health data. And really, I think the next step we're going to see is testing of the limits of those abortion shield laws coming into play.
An abortion shield law. Please explain.
Yeah, so we've heard, of course, once the Dobbs decision came into play, that a lot of states enacted or had, their on the shelf laws already come into play restricting abortion, and so that's kind of one end of the spectrum. When we talk about abortion shield laws, we're talking about states, for instance, like California, Massachusetts, New York, who are wanting to take the opposite approach and actively, proactively protect reproductive health care rights for their citizens and for their healthcare providers. So we have seen a lot of states come on the books with abortion shield laws. And of course, it varies by
Hmm.
state, but this is going to be something that says, you know what, if you're a healthcare provider and you're providing reproductive healthcare services, we're not going to extradite you to another jurisdiction. Like if Florida says, hey, you provided reproductive healthcare services to our patient, like we want to prosecute you, they're not going to
Wow.
do that. They're not going to release patient health data that's related to reproductive health back to those jurisdictions where the patient could potentially be prosecuted. They're going to, scrutinize any types of subpoenas, that type of thing, to make sure they're
Hmm.
not for reproductive health crimes that would be legal in that state. And really, what's interesting too is we've seen this just happen with New York. They're trying to allow providers to give abortion related care via telemedicine to patients who are located in other states.
Mm.
And that is kind of the newest development with New York. It's very interesting because it essentially throws the entire telehealth model on its head.
Yeah.
Because the way that we do telehealth is we say that the law of the state where the patient resides, that's the state law that's going to prevail. And so that means that a provider has to be licensed in the state where the patient is. And now New York has essentially turned that on its head and said New York providers can prescribe abortion medicine, telemedicine, that type of thing anywhere.
Wow.
And that is going to be, I think, challenged, and I think that's going to be something that we're going to be watching play out and kind of see what are these actual limits, not just for reproductive health, but telehealth in general.
I never once thought the ramifications of the overturning of Roe had any implications of the data itself. It's fascinating
Mhm.
to me because it's not just the rights now going to states' rights, it's also the data because the states that they want to prosecute. It's fascinating to me. And now if New York and other states like this want to offer telehealth, I mean ultimately Bethany, it's going to be about money, isn't it? It's going to follow the money on these things.
Yeah, it follows the money. And it also, even if states are trying to be protective of their citizens and their providers, right, there's a lot of overreaching that's happening on both ends, right? On the abortion shield laws and on the restrictive abortion laws that are coming into play as well. So it's a lot of overreaching. We're seeing this also with the mifepristone case, right? The FDA's approval of mifepristone now being challenged, 20 plus years later. And so that is all really coming into play and making women's health a political battleground. And Joe, what you said, that it's impacting the data, this Dobbs decision. You're
Right.
absolutely right. And I want to take that point a little bit further, because what we've also seen, right? We've seen women who are deleting their period tracking in FemTech apps. Okay.
Mm,
So that means less data. What we're also seeing, though, is kind of twofold. We're seeing first the people who are deleting those period tracking apps and those femtech apps are most likely going to be disproportionately in the states that have those abortion restrictive laws.
mm,
And that, unfortunately, is going to impact certain racial and ethnic minority groups disproportionately. And
mm.
so we're going to get less varied data in these femtech apps through which algorithms are being trained. So that's kind of one concern I have. And then the other concern I have really is people are inputting false data into these femtech apps. And that's not necessarily new. because of Dobbs, but it's heightened since Dobbs. There have been studies that show that almost 50+% of individuals using health tech apps are inputting at least some form of false data because they aren't comfortable sharing that information with the app. They don't think
Mm.
it's necessary for that algorithmic prediction. But when we think about it in women's health, after the Dobbs decision, a bunch of men and other individuals started flooding these apps with false data in an effort to try to throw law enforcement off. And that's problematic because some of these applications are actually partnering with downstream research institutions to make research findings for long-term women's healthcare on data that now could potentially be flawed. So those are kind of two data issues that we've started to see.
What's the solution there, Bethany?
You know, really the solution is that these femtech companies need to have enhanced privacy and security protections. And that's interesting too, because until the Dobbs decision in femtech, privacy and security of a femtech application was not a market differentiator. And because of that, a lot of companies were not investing the time and the money into doing things like privacy by design or security by design and making those privacy centric choices for consumers. And the reason was there was no way for consumers to really differentiate on the market a company that had good privacy protection for their data and a
Mm.
company that didn't. Well, now, since the Dobbs decision, consumers are actually paying much more attention and they are starting to look at the privacy practices of these applications and these companies. And so, what we have started to see for the first time in femtech is privacy and security actually being a differentiator. And so, more and more companies, we saw it most recently with Flow, are coming out with things like anonymous modes to try to help protect the data and the privacy and sensitivity of its customers and of the data that it's receiving. So really, I think that's where we have to go. The impetus and the burden has to be on the femtech companies to make their products with adequate privacy and security safeguards, to adhere to things like the minimum necessary principle for data collection. And once we have that, I think that we can shift this landscape and regain consumer trust.
You have great content on your, Instagram and on your sites. Why women should care protecting privacy and health tech apps. You mentioned three ways that the health data is personal, confident in the partnership, and then of course your voice matters in shaping data usage in the future. These are all very valid points that people should look into.
Absolutely. And other things too that consumers don't realize is they actually have a ton of purchasing power. Women make 80% of healthcare purchasing decisions. And so if women are demanding these types of privacy and security protections in the apps and the products that they're using, that's going to shift the industry and change how companies and tech founders are looking at and valuing privacy. And so until we as consumers value our privacy and make that a defining consumer choice, it won't flow down. But if we did, think of the power that we would have in transforming that privacy landscape.
Bethany, how can men help with this? How can I help? How can anybody listening that's a man help?
We need all the help we can get, honestly. And I will say a lot of the voices in the femtech community right now are those who identify as women for
Mm.
obvious reasons. But the thing is, until we get support and buy-in from males and man stakeholders, it's impossible to change the underlying societal stigmas and taboos that
Mm.
have kept women out of mainstream medicine for so long. And so we need advocates. We need men coming to help femtech companies to spread their message, to be involved in this movement. Because if they're not, it takes us so much longer to get where we're going. So, for instance, so little funding goes to women's health research as it is. And yet, most of the time, right, these femtech companies have to go and pitch to male VCs to get funding. And I can't tell you how many times they go and they talk to a male VC and the VC doesn't understand why this is a problem for women. Something like endometriosis, PCOS, they just don't understand because it's not something they've experienced. Maybe they don't have a close relative who's experienced it.
Mm.
And and another question they get asked is, well, how does this impact men? And so it's very much women's tech is having such a hard time with fundraising, in part because we have those other barriers because men aren't part of this conversation and they aren't involved in women's healthcare to the extent that we need them to be. So we need all of the advocates and the allies that we can get.
I mean, when you say that women are responsible for 80% of the purchase of the household, I mean, that's a high VCs and these firms, virtual venture capitalists and right, PE firms should take note of this. It's noteworthy. You say when choosing femtech products, also in your posts, do your research, assess the needs, user friendly, and then of course privacy and security, professional validation.
Absolutely. And the thing too is, VCs have started to take notice about the femtech industry, but it's interesting because you can see a clear difference in the products and the solutions that are coming out because somebody has had a personal experience, right? And is building something based on a pain point they've had to prevent other women from undergoing that, versus the tech founders who are starting to get in the industry now because they realize how lucrative of an opportunity this can
Mm.
be. And it's interesting because what we've started to see is that companies who are coming on to kind of capitalize on this opportunity, a lot of the products that you see on the market have significant inaccuracy concerns that can actually be harmful to women because they're not involving any type of medical or scientific oversight or involvement in their products. And so we see that very often with companies that are trying to race to market to get something on the market to compete with what's out there and to try to make money quickly. So, for instance, there have been some studies that have shown they've looked at the top 100 or so period and ovulation tracking apps. And one study found that none of them could accurately predict ovulation,
Mm.
and that the greatest accuracy rate was 21%. And there have also been studies by Okra and others who have shown that about 85% of the femtech products they're looking at on the market have clinical accuracy and medical concerns. And so that's pretty huge, and a pretty
Wow.
big issue in femtech whenever we don't have a lot of regulations that are governing who is developing these products, the fact that they need to be accurate, all of that.
Is there also a kind of there's got to be a political kind of hot touch stigma there because it can be perceived that the company is on one side of the row issue and the other, and depending on rights, and so then a lot of people don't want to touch it as well. I mean, that's a big issue.
It's a big issue, and that was one of the big questions that came out of the Dobbs decision is, how is this going to affect femtech funding?
Right.
And so there were some people who, kind of thought, well, because there are fewer solutions out there now, and because we have a heightened need for tech solutions to get into, the states that may have abortion restrictive laws, we're going to see an increase in investment. I have always been on the side that I
Hmm.
think we're going to see some mild increase in investment in certain areas, but overall, I've always thought it was going to remain stagnant or decline a little bit because of exactly what you said, right? It's a politicized terrain, but also from a legal perspective, it is very uncertain right now what this
Mm.
landscape is going to shake out to be. And so if you're a VC looking at this landscape and looking at the changing nature of it, right, you've got to be questioning whether or not you want to invest in this climate or whether you say, hey, let's let this go another year, see how things shake out. Because what's happening partly is companies that are at the forefront of reproductive health right now, they're going to be the ones that could potentially be sued under these new laws that are coming out, or they would be the ones, trying to use these abortion shield laws to protect their business proceedings. Well, if that gets challenged, right, you've got to be prepared that you're going to be one of the early litigators of what's happening in this judicial landscape. So that's kind of a risk, right, if you're looking at it from an investor perspective. And then you're also looking at it from the perspective of, okay, we know that we need investment in maternal health care, right? Fertility, reproductive services. but how do we build something that's going to be meaningfully different than what's already out there? Because we have seen a lot of saturation in the market already with period tracking apps, ovulation tracking apps, that type of thing. So how do you build something that's different during this post-Dobbs environment? I think that those are some concerns that investors have. And so from the research that I've seen, I've seen a lot of investors, unless they're already in the women's health space, right, or specifically focusing on that space, I've seen them holding off to see how this landscape settles.
This, Bethany, it saddens me, it terrifies me. I'm a father of two daughters,
Mhm.
and they're in their early 20s, and I want what's best for them. But the good news to this is that you founded Feminovation, and it's helping. Tell us how.
Yeah, so Feminovation is new. We just launched in June, and really what we're focused on is actually helping these early and mid-stage femtech companies get access to the resources that they need to build their companies and get to market faster. And so what we've really identified is that there's a huge gap in the resources that are available for early and mid-stage femtech companies, specifically when you think about things like legal or marketing advice, anything like that.
Hmm.
There's often an inability for these companies to pay for the advice that they need at these early stages. So we are building kind of the first one-stop shop platform where founders could come and say, you know what, I'm building this new femtech company and I need these resources or assistance or coaching or counseling to get my company off the ground. What do I need to do from a legal perspective, product development, IP, marketing, growth, scaling thoughts? What do I need to do for all of that? And then we will have this platform that walks them through it, that has kind of keeping up to date videos, newest, regulatory trends, things like that. And then the other thing that we're focused on is bridging that clinician founder gap. So, as I was mentioning
Hmm.
before, a lot of these tech founders are not involving clinicians or medical personnel in the development of their products. And what that means is that a lot of the data that these femtech companies collect and produce is not able to be used by medical professionals in a clinically relevant setting, right? Because
Hmm.
they don't know how these, devices are vetted. They don't know if that data is accurate or not, right? So, yes, it's great for women to be able to monitor their health data, but also if that data is not clinically usable by the clinicians, we have a problem.
Mm.
And so, what we want to do is get more clinicians involved in the femtech space. So, we are building a sister platform that will have resources and trainings for OBGYNs, clinicians, and scientists and researchers who want to get more involved in this space and who want to be connected with founders who might need somebody with that background involved in product development or on an advisory board. And then part of what we're doing as well is to help foster relationships with healthcare organizations who might want access to these femtech products, might want to sponsor trials, might want to see if that's a good fit for an offering for their patients, really helping to facilitate that almost kind of matchmaking process.
Bethany, you mentioned before that many are holding back and waiting to see kind of the landscape fold out with the suits, with lawsuits, and with how legal, how cases are gonna, oh my goodness, take all this on. Any timeline for that? Do you have a guess?
I would say that things will start to shake out within the next year, year and a half, just in terms of, I think we'll get some of those first lawsuits that are going to
Right.
be pending. I'm not saying that we'll have the decisions because obviously we have all of the appeals processes going on. So I do think it's going to take some time. We have seen, some new avenues for investment coming up, that might not be the traditional VC routes. We've seen more companies starting to form to fund women's health ventures more, on the lower side of investment, but still, some angel founders who are trying to get involved, that sort of thing. So there are other opportunities for funding, but I think when you're looking at that kind of high VC private equity funding, that's going to be pretty hard to still obtain, especially when you compound the fact that we have a downturn in digital health investing anyway, right? And then you add the complexities of reproductive health on top of that.
Mm.
It makes it a hard sell, especially if you're selling to male VCs who you've already got that kind of initial barrier to make them understand why your product is important.
You mentioned before that you were a law professor. I've heard you talk before. You were in a big partner firm, but you were, paid well, but you were just unhappy. There's a lot of stress, and now you've completely pivoted to this, where I can sense your passion, and it's a worthy one, and it's lovely. But um, that took a lot of sacrifice to make this pivot in your life, but it's well been worth it.
It has, and sometimes we need those life events to push us where we're supposed to be because we can take the easy route. I was next in line for partner at the firm I was at. I didn't mind the work that I was doing, but it wasn't personally fulfilling. I
Mm,
wasn't doing any kind of great societal service with, with what I was doing,
mm,
especially helping, kind of the insurance companies, right? The PBMs, that type of thing. And so, I think we're given these opportunities along our journey to make choices about the impact we want to have on society. And for me, having that experience, it would have been, very easy to just go back into my old role, right? Keep going, keep making the money, but then I would have lost, in my opinion, the value of that experience. So for me, it was all about taking something negative and trying to make it so that other women and other founders and other just individuals didn't have to go through that same process if there was a way I could help. And it's interesting, right? Because you think, okay, I'm a lawyer, right? I'm not a doctor. How do
that's
I
right.
help for women's health? That was something I struggled with. And I'm not a tech person by any means. So, I even thought, okay, maybe I build a product that can help with fibroids, but that's not my skill set. My skill set is research, writing, being a lawyer, helping with contracts, helping to negotiate. And so for me, it was trying to find a merger of those skills with my passion for femtech now and realizing that no matter what industry you're in, if you're passionate about something, you can find a way to make a difference. And I will say, making that change has been so rewarding, even
Mm,
on a personal level, where you feel like you're contributing and giving back in ways that you never thought possible before.
mm.
And that's not going to be possible unless you take that leap.
So Bethany, I started my tech business. I'm in the tech industry back in the 90s, and I wasn't paying attention to myself. And, I worked way too much like you were doing. And I found myself up to 340 pounds. I'm typically 200. And the doctor said to me, "You're not going to see your daughter graduate unless you lose the weight." So similar to yourself, you had this, you know, uh, you went to the appointment and this was uncovered. Fortunate for me, I had got me there and I was going to get myself out of it. So I spent the next year and a half losing about 130 pounds. People ask me how, losing weight is very difficult and want some
Hugely difficult.
secret. Yeah, very difficult. One of the hardest things to do in life and some secret as to how I did it. And I just say discipline. I got focus and I got discipline. That's how I use it. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Bethany Corbin.
Oh, it's a huge player, especially even more so when you're running your own company.
Mm.
Because, right, it's easy to be disciplined if you have an external client obligation, right? Or you have a partner who's breathing down your neck for a
Hmm.
deadline. It's easy to be disciplined to get that work done when you get in that routine. It's interesting because once you entirely shift to building your own company, there's no necessarily outside force that's
Right.
forcing you to get things done. And that is kind of where all of that self-discipline comes into play because it would be so easy for me to say, "Oh yeah, I'm taking today off, right? I'm going to go to the park today." Nobody's pressuring me for a deadline. When instead I have to build my own deadlines. I have to be almost my own boss in a sense of making myself get this done, to build this platform, to build those resources. For me, it comes down to being disciplined and organized
Hmm.
and having a plan that I can follow and making sure that I don't brush off those deadlines to myself as being flexible. So it is a lot about discipline and accountability. And it's, very difficult, especially when you don't have somebody managing you. You have to be your own manager. That was a skill I had to learn.
Yeah, the shift from, yeah, working in a corporation where there's always coffee there and, there's and then all of a sudden you're working for yourself where you run out of paper for the printer and, these kind of things kind of happen and you have to take a step back and be self-disciplined in that. It's a wonderful take. And I wonder, as you're helping these firms in femtech and, helping them try to get some resources to them. I
Mhm.
wonder, oh my goodness, you're gonna give some advice on that, and discipline will certainly be a part of that advice as well.
Oh, absolutely, because the founders that we're working with have the exact same need
Right.
for discipline, right, that I do or that you do in building our own companies. And even more so because they have timelines in which, we've got to get investment. Maybe we have enough bootstrapping our friends and family investment to go for 12 to 18 months. And during that time, we have to build a product. We've got to get some marketing. We've got to get baseline legal. And all of that requires the founders to be extraordinarily disciplined in how they
Hmm.
not only are going to manage their time and divide, their responsibilities, but also in how they're going to manage their funds, because they're often very limited at that stage, and that takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah, discipline, patience, accountability. My goodness,
Oh
yeah, the
yeah.
funding. Yeah. Bethany Corbin, what motivates you?
That's a great question. I think for a long time, that was something I didn't really know how to define,
Mm,
especially in my early career. What motivated me was, I enjoyed research, I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed contracts and negotiation. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna do my daily chore as a lawyer, right? Go to work, and I'll find something that's fulfilling or motivating later. And I can tell you, kind of having that experience with my women's health condition completely changed my life. And that now what motivates me is the thought that I actually have the power to help at least one other person in this world in a way that I never thought possible before, in a way that I never thought could happen at a large law firm, right? Where you're just doing huge contracts that you don't find personally meaningful. So for me, knowing that my advice or my resources or my platform could help a founder get their product to market in a way in which, maybe without these resources, they wouldn't have been able to afford to do so.
mm,
They could get a product to market that could help millions of women. That is really what motivates me. The potential for us as a collective whole to transform how women's health is thought about by society and what the future of women's health could potentially be, which I personally hope, for instance, in 5 years or 10 years, there isn't even a category called
mm,
femtech because
mm.
it's so widely understood that women's health is human health. And so getting to that stage, that's really what motivates me now.
And here in the U.S., we tend to just I don't know, we have an island mentation, mentality here. It's an international effort.
Yes, hugely international effort. The femtech industry right now, most of the companies, over 50% are in North America, and obviously most of them are in the US when we think about North America. There's, kind of Europe's in second place, and then we do have some femtech companies that are coming up in Africa and in Asia. What's interesting about the landscape is you're absolutely right. This is a global effort
Mm,
because the same issues that we experience in the US, women are experiencing in Asia, right? In Africa, in
yeah.
Europe. And so if we're just building products that are applicable to women in the US or that are trained on data from women in the US, we're not building truly global products to revolutionize women's healthcare worldwide. And so what we've, tried to challenge founders with is to make their companies truly global. And of course, that takes time, that takes scaling, et cetera. But for instance, when you're building your product, don't just build it on data from Caucasian women. Build it on data from, people who are in Africa, people who are in Asia right now, because that's where you ultimately want your product to go. So that's kind of something that we've started to really recommend and push for companies. We've also started to see some great femtech organizations spring up across the world. So, for instance, Femtech Association Asia is really helping founders over in Asia navigate the women's health market there. And I had the privilege of talking with their founder pretty recently,
Mm,
and she said, that they are a couple of years behind where the US is in terms of the femtech market. So for instance, where the US now has a pretty saturated market for, period tracking, ovulation, fertility tracking, that's just now being built over in Asia.
Hmm.
So they're a couple years behind. But what she said to me was pretty powerful in that we were talking about how she thought that landscape might grow in the future. And she says it could be and should be bigger than what we have in the US in the future, just
Right.
given the population size
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah.
And so companies that are building just in the US are really neglecting the opportunities that we have worldwide and what could even be bigger markets for their products.
How has AI influenced femtech?
Yeah, so AI is it is starting to be incorporated into femtech products. We see this most often, through algorithms that are making the predictions, for fertility, period tracking, that type of thing. But we've also started to see things like Chat GPT being incorporated into some femtech products. Of course, that's still at the early stages, and so
Yeah.
sometimes you get advice through those types of AI algorithms and Chat GPT products that are not accurate.
Hmm.
And I think that's a problem that we have not only in femtech but obviously through health tech. Is just that AI that you're using is only going to be as good and as accurate as the sources from which it's pulling the data. So I think that's something that we're looking at in femtech specifically, is making sure that we have reputable sources for the medical data that might be pulled by these AI products. But yeah, we're definitely starting to see an uptake in AI on the femtech side. And I think it's something, I was talking with another founder who's actually using AI in some preterm birth products that could be used to kind of identify mothers and children who are at risk for having early deliveries. And it's interesting because they're training their AI on hundreds and thousands of pictures, that are very representative and across the globe. But I was asking her, do you think AI is the future of femtech? Just given what you know and what you've seen from AI, and the answer, kind of from both of us was a resounding yes. We
Hmm.
think this is exactly where the industry is going. We're seeing more products, coming out with updates and new versions that incorporate AI to some extent. And so I think the next step is really going to be making sure that AI is pulling from diverse data sources and truthful and accurate data sources.
Bethany, how do you measure success?
Whew, that's a tough one, Joe. I think for so long, I measured success by not doing anything wrong. And what I mean by that is, I'm a perfectionist. And so for me, right, if I was in my job and I was doing good work and I, wasn't getting negative feedback, I was making the money that I needed to survive, that to me was a successful life. And now having pivoted into women's health, my definition of success is much different because I actually look at success now as much more of a journey rather than something that I can achieve as a destination very
Hmm.
quickly. And I'm no longer afraid to fail because I see failure as part of success. Because
Yeah.
unless we try, we're never going to be creating something that could potentially be life changing. So for me, success is,
Bethany.
have I had an impact on women's healthcare in a positive way? If I can say yes, that to me is success. That is what I'm trying to achieve, is a positive impact on women's health so that the people who come next, so they can build on what we've already achieved and continue to drive women's health forward.
Bethany, I can't applaud you enough. I mean, I was so excited when you accepted this, and researching you, hearing you talk, you give me chills. At a particular point. I mean, this is such an important issue. Again, as if I selfishly, anecdotally look at it, my daughters, and um, just women have played such a large role in my life, and um, I love what you're doing. I asked you this before, but anybody that wants to help, we need to go. Tell us what to do.
Yeah, please get in touch. So you can reach out to me directly. My email is bethany@feminovation.com. You can learn more about what we're building at Feminovation because we're actively seeking partners and sponsors for the platform, because one of our goals is to make it accessible to all femtech founders. So you can learn more at feminovation.com. I am very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me on linkedin.com/in/Bethany Corbin. And there are so many ways to get involved, not only with Feminovation, but also with women's health in general. So, for instance, there are other efforts that are going on out there, such as Women's Health Access Matters. They have a 3 Not 30 campaign about getting more funding for women's health in 3 years rather than waiting another 30 years to
Mm.
invest in it. The Center for Intimacy Justice, they have filed an FTC complaint against Meta for discriminatory advertising policies for women's health founders. So there's so much going on in this space. Reach out if you have a particular interest, and I'm happy to connect you if your interest is broader than Feminovation.
That's Fem, F-E-M, as in feminine, innovation.com. Like you said, Bethany, Bethany Corbin, Corbin, and LinkedIn, FemTech Lawyer. You're on Twitter. You're also on Instagram. Definitely take a look. And thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And please continue your great work.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
You be well. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.